So much media, so little time, and so many technology issues. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Adelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, recorded maybe for the third time live today on blogtalkradio.com on March 5th, 2008. I tried my hand at stand-up comedy twice in college, once as a freshman at the University of Miami, and again a year later at the University of Florida. And no, I wasn't so bad at Miami that I was asked to leave. They were a lot more subtle than that. Anyway, I gave up that dream early. It's a tough, humiliating life. Not for me. Now, Robert Schimmel, on the other hand, is one of the best stand-up comedians of his generation. He, like Richard Belzer before him, is the guy other comedians watch and measure themselves against. He is naturally funny and naturally crude, rude, and not recommended for listeners under the age of 18. That's my way of saying, if you're too young to drink, or if you're easily offended, tune out now. The button-down mind of Bob Newhart, this definitely is not. Now these days, Schimmel is still out doing his job, making people laugh, but there is a twist. In 2000, when his career was reaching new heights, he was diagnosed with stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer. Not good. But he underwent aggressive therapy and routed the disease, even discovering a new source of material for his act in the process. And he's written a book, Cancer on $5 a Day, Chemo Not Included, How Humor Got Me Through the Toughest Journey of My Life. And now, with any luck, Robert, welcome to Mr. Media.
Hi.
Hi. I am so sorry for all the blather that went on trying to get you to this point, but welcome. I'm delighted to have you here.
Oh, I'm glad to be on.
Hey, Robert, I'm kind of curious. You've written your first book. What was it like to see your material, in such a permanent format? I mean, you've done CDs, and subject matter aside for the moment, I mean, it's Robert Schimmel's voice on paper. What was that like for you?
It was hard. I never had any intention of writing a book before because I have friends that are comedians that have books out, and basically what their book is it's like their stand-up act that has been transcribed and put into a book. And I never wanted to do anything like that because I know and that there are some jokes that you can tell live on stage, and maybe it's your delivery or your timing, your personality, where all those things play into the way the joke works, and you look at it on a piece of paper, and it's not the same thing. And I used to write for In Living Color. I mean, there were sketches that, you'd write that you knew were funny, but other people read them on a sheet of paper, and they go, nah, we got to punch it up a little bit, and it was perfect the way it was the first time. I wrote this. I had somebody help me write this book. I'm not going to deny that because I respect writers, and they usually don't get any credit for when they help somebody else. But I have a picture of the guy in the inside flap of the book. His name's Alan Eisenstock, and the reason why I chose to have him help me was twofold. One, he interviewed me in 2000 when I was on top of the world career-wise, for a Father's Day issue of Variety magazine. And as we spoke, it wound up us getting kind of close, and he found out that I lost a son in 1992, and I found out that he lost a son. So when they offered me the book this year, I wanted to find someone that could help me because I knew that I wanted to have somebody else that shared that same experience as I did because they could help me express myself and maybe in some words that might not be in my vocabulary or a way to say it that I don't. But I also wanted someone that didn't go through cancer the way I did because I wanted them not to be in my shoes for that because then they could be a good judge and I can talk about what I went through and some of the procedures and tests and all these other things, and to me it's like I might as well be reading a menu to you. But, I talk to other people, and, other people get overwhelmed, and they're like, whoa, 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 I don't tell me anymore. So I needed someone to say, you know what, you're getting too heavy here, and, you kind of said this in this other thing, so you should, so he helped guide me into putting it in order and making sure that the book was still lighthearted. That's why I chose the title, Cancer on $5 a Day, Chemo Not Included, because I wanted people to know right up front that I'm not Deepak Chopra or Dr. Phil, and that I am a comedian. This is about cancer, but there are lighthearted moments in it. The only other choice I had for a title, they wanted something like My Unplanned Journey, that's not me. But the other title was When Bad Things Happen to Seemingly Good People. But I like Cancer on $5 a Day. I think that grabs you, and you look at it, and I'm really I'm very proud of it. I really am. It's well, first of all, it's dedicated to my son, and I've been waiting, ever since that happened, to find something that I can dedicate to him and leave that mark even after I'm not here anymore. Mm-hmm. And if people read this or someone reads it, and I know that people have heard my story before because I talk about it on stage, if it gives somebody, hope or inspiration, or go, wow, he's 7 years out from what he had, and I just started treatment now, I can do it, then what I went through wasn't for nothing. And then it's, then I get to do what I love doing the most, which is make people laugh and entertain them and maybe touch them in a way that could help change their lives for the better. And I do believe that laughter is very healing, not only for the people laughing, but for the people on the receiving end of the laughter, too.
I have to say, as a guy who makes his living co-authoring books, that it was very nice. Not only to hear just a minute ago you give Alan Eisenstock credit for helping you with this, but he actually wrote the introduction to the book, which was very touching in and of itself. It's very unusual that way. Yeah, well, I know he's written other books for a couple other comedians he's worked with, where he told me that, that those guys never mention his name, that, he's gone to book signings with them where they don't even acknowledge he's in the room. And I just can't do that. Maybe it's because of what I went through versus somebody else where they're just a comic and they have a book out for something. I admire what he did, and I respect him, and he deserves the credit for what he did. I can't lie and tell people that I did it all by myself, because it's not true, and I just wouldn't do it. And I mention him on the radio. I did now. Every interview I do, I bring his name up. I don't see what's wrong with it. And I could understand why writers would want to strike, and when they don't get the credit that's due to them, because this guy basically had to go back into his own feelings about losing his child for us to, we sat together for days and days and days. Every week we got together like 3-4 days a week at Vernon, this Greek restaurant that's in Malibu, and it's like halfway between where he lives and I live. There were days when we were laughing. There were days when we were crying, when we just had to stop, and we said we couldn't do any more that day because he started talking about things about his son. I would talk about mine, and then that was just it. And we knew that we weren't going to get anything done that was going to be able to get on paper that day. And so for him to do that, to me, that's not just sitting down and writing a book with someone or transcribing or rewriting. He emotionally took that roller coaster ride with me. And it's a tough ride to take. It really is. And I didn't want to write about my son in the book, and I'll tell you why. It's so bizarre. I only want to have a positive effect on people with this book, not negative. And the fact that my son lost his battle is, I didn't want to put that in anybody's head. I very rarely talk about my son in my act on stage unless it's a fundraiser for a pediatric oncology thing. Otherwise,
I don't want to use what happened to Derek as I don't want to exploit what my son went through to elicit a certain response from the audience. Because, I mean, honestly, I told Alan, we both have like the ultimate trump card. I mean, I could go on stage and bomb, and people can come over, or the owner, and say, you really stunk. And I could say, yeah, yesterday was my son's birthday, and he would have been. And that's all you got to say, and you're off the hook right there. And I just won't do it. Mm. And I didn't. But there are people that don't make it. I mean, I want to be realistic also, but life is still beautiful no matter what. I mean, my life is as precious as his was, and I have other children, and I just didn't want them to feel like second-class citizens to him. I mean, what would they have to do? Get really sick before they get the attention he got? Mm. And I did find humor in it. I mean, when you're in the hospital and you lose all your hair, and I mean everything, and your doctor comes in and says, would you be interested in a wig? And he has like an 8x10, like a binder, a notebook with different headshots with wigs on them. And I said to the guy, do you have one, for, my crotch? And the guy says, as a matter of fact, we do. And he showed me pictures. I almost fell out of the bed. And he said, Robert, they're virtually undetectable. And I'm thinking, undetectable? I don't have one eyelash. And then I'm going to have a shrub between my legs, and that's not going to be detectable?
Now, wait a minute. Did you actually buy one, though?
Of course I did.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Of course I did, and it looked so stupid. It looked like a hair donut. It was like a Krispy Kreme donut that somebody dropped on a barbershop floor. And my wife wouldn't even play ring toss with me.
Now, did you buy a wig for your head, though, for the top of your head?
No.
No, but you bought one for your crotch.
Yeah, well, because I was losing my hair already before chemotherapy, and I was thinking, if I walked out of the hospital with a full head of hair, people would go, what are you, kidding? I mean, that was already going way before chemotherapy.
Right.
And the first day when I got, I do believe that attitude has a lot to do with overcoming obstacles in your life. When I first got diagnosed, my doctor came in the room, and I thought I had the flu. I was working in Las Vegas at the Lance Burton Theater in Monte Carlo. It was June 2nd and 3rd, 2000. Coming back from the Forum Shops with my dad, and I'm freezing. And I said, we got to stop. I got to get a sweatshirt or something. I'm shivering. And he said, Bob, it's like 112 degrees out. And I go back to my room, like an hour before the show, I'm getting the chills and like sweats, and I go into a hot shower that was so hot, my dad couldn't believe that I was standing in there, and I still had goosebumps and my teeth were chattering. Hmm. So I thought it was the flu, and I felt tired. I was losing weight. I go to the doctor. They find a little lump. They go and do a biopsy, and even after what I went through with my son, cancer was the furthest thing from my mind. I mean, I would think that that's not going to happen 2 times in my immediate family. And when they told me, the guy came in, I was with my mom and dad and my wife, and he had a legal pad, and he drew down the center, a line down the center. On one side he wrote Hodgkin's disease, on the other side he wrote non-Hodgkin's. Then he wrote aggressive, indolent, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and all this stuff. And he said, Robert, I wish I could tell you that you had Hodgkin's disease, but you have non-Hodgkin's. And I said, you know what? That's just my luck. I got the one that's not named after the guy. And he laughed, and he said, you know what? You're going to be okay. And I said, I am? And he said, yeah. It goes, your head's in the right place. And I'm not saying I wasn't scared, because I was. I mean, it got to a point right before the last treatment where, it's like you're thinking, if this didn't work, I mean, I don't know what would happen to me mentally. And, only so many things can happen to you before you just start laughing, because that's the only thing left to do is laugh. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really is. My parents are Holocaust survivors. My dad's parents and his sister and brother were shot in front of him and killed, and he's the sole survivor of his family and went to Auschwitz. And my mom was in Eichmann's last March. My dad has the greatest sense of humor I've ever heard. He never is negative. As a matter of fact, when Derek got diagnosed, he said, Robert, don't look up at God and ask why. Derek didn't do anything wrong. It has nothing to do with that. He said, life doesn't always go the way you plan it, and the toughest thing for some people is to surrender to the fact that there are things in life that you just have no control over. And, I'm a very lucky guy. I have, including Derek, I have 6 children. There wasn't any time in my life where I could afford to have a substance abuse problem, and I don't drink. But I have gone with a couple of friends to some AA meetings, and I got to tell you something. The Serenity Prayer, that's not a bullshit story. I mean, if you lived by that, I think that you'd be in good shape, because I think a lot of people get hung up where you don't know the difference between things that you can change and that you can't. I did everything I could for my son. My wife did, my parents did, the doctors did. The rest of it is in somebody else's hands. And, it's for me to know why, honestly, if an angel came down right now while we were talking and said, you know what, I heard you talking about your son, and I know you still, miss him and you love him, and I'm going to tell you why he died, it wouldn't make any difference. It really wouldn't. So I just read something the other day, by the way. It's in front of a dry cleaners in Burbank. There was a son, they have a marquee at the dry cleaners, and they always have these little quotes up there. And this one said, life's not about surviving the storm. It's learning to dance in the rain. And that really hit me, because that's really what it is. And to me, when I'm on stage and I make people laugh, I feel like I'm in complete control of everything. It's probably the only place that I feel in control completely. The minute you step off stage, anything can happen. But, what's going to happen when you're up there? Did I bomb and I die? Well, every comic's died on stage, and one of the first things you learn is there's life after death. You get to come back to die again. There's a lot of dying before you start getting funny.
Now, Robert, I got to interrupt you there, because one of the things that I marked in the book was that you say, I'm not ready to die, period. You say, to begin with, I cannot imagine a future without me in it. So
yes, because my doctor told me he said, here's what you have to do. Every day you have to take a few moments, a few times a day, when you wake up, in the afternoon, before you go to sleep, and you have to visualize yourself in the future. You have to constantly do that. And to me, I couldn't see the future without me in it. I couldn't. And I tried. I really did. I closed my eyes and tried to see my funeral, because I wanted to see a lot of people crying and going, Bob, come back. And I couldn't. I just couldn't. I know the way things go in my life, and it just wasn't going to be that easy that I would just die and get off the hook. I just wasn't going to be gone yet. It's not, and look, I miss my son. I know one day that I'll be with him, but it's not time for me to be with him. And I can't feel bad about it. Did I? Yes. Probably the worst feeling that I had, worse than getting diagnosed with cancer, honestly, was on December 12, 2000, when after I finished all my treatment and I got my first MRI and my CAT scan, and they said that I was clear and that starting that day I can consider myself in remission. And I started suffering from survivor's guilt. Because I felt really weird that, why did I make it and my son didn't? And, I talked to my father about it, and my father told me he went through the same thing after the war. That after he met my wife, wow, that was a Freudian slip. Oh, shit. That was a genuine Freudian slip.
That's the Schimmel people were expecting.
Yeah, he said that why me? Why why did I get to meet the love of my life and have 3 children and get to see my grandchildren being born, and my mother, father, and sister and brother didn't? Well, it's not for him to know why. And, the guy told me, they say things, there's no way it could not be funny. When you go to the doctor and he says that you have open sores in your mouth and down your throat, because that's what happens with chemotherapy, that to avoid any kind of oral anal contact, and I'm thinking, do I look like an ass eater to you? First you tell me I have cancer, now I can't kiss anybody's ass. When's the punishment going to stop? Why did he think I was going to be doing that? I could barely eat Jell-O.
Right.
You're not supposed to have sex when you're on chemotherapy because all the chemotherapy in you comes out in all your bodily fluids. And, so it's actually they told me that if I had a bathroom that I could use that my wife and daughters didn't use, that would be the way to do it because guys sometimes pee on the seat. And if a girl sits on it and any of that gets on them or in them, it could be dangerous. And he said, but you could take care of yourself. You don't have to, Well, it is really hard to lay in bed and pray to God and say, please let me get through this, and then be jerking off in the same bed looking up at the same ceiling. It's impossible. It just really is. And I prayed, and I had a really hard time doing it. And I'll tell you why. I think I'm more spiritual than religious. And, I'm laying in bed asking God to get me through this. And it felt like I had a friend that I hadn't talked to in 10 years. And out of the blue, I'm calling him and asking him to lend me $1,000. I don't pray all the time, and then here I am asking for the biggest thing you could ask for, which is not to die. And but I prayed to everybody. I prayed to Buddha. I prayed to Jesus. I prayed to, if they would have been a G.I. Joe in the room, I would have been praying to him. Anything and anything to get me through it.
Well, you said in the book that the day you were diagnosed that the rabbi came in, and then I guess a priest came in, and
yeah.
Talked about prayer and I can't remember. I think it was the priest who said, what's it going to hurt to try? If it's and you talk. I think you also talk about you just assume talk to all sides because you don't want to get up there and find out that all those people who are trying to interest you in Jesus, that maybe they were right, and you would have to set aside, right?
Yeah, well, no, there's a chaplain in the in the hospital, and they do their rounds every day. When the guy came in the first time, he said, "Hi, I'm the chaplain," and he said, "Are you a Christian?" And I said, "No, I'm Jewish." And he said, "Well, I'm sorry that I bothered you." And I said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I don't want you to leave." And I said, he said, "Well, you want to pray with me?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go." And he said, "Okay, but I'm going to be praying to Jesus." And I said, "I'm going to be right there with you. I don't want to die and get up there and have Jesus at the gate going, you? Where do you think you're going?" Who knows? What? I think people invented religion. God didn't do all that. And so, whether you're Catholic or Lutheran or Protestant or Jewish or whatever, I look at God as like a like in the middle of a bicycle wheel, and every spoke is a different religion, and it doesn't make any difference which one you're on. They all lead to the same thing. As long as you're on one of them, then that's good. And I did a radio show last week, I think, in New York, where I was on the radio with there was a doctor on the show, and when I said that I prayed while I was on getting chemotherapy, he started laughing, and he said, "You really did that?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You're praying to nothing. There is nothing." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah." He goes, "That's not real." And he said, "And the Bible was made up by other people." And he said, "I believe in evolution, and we evolved from apes. That's where we came from, not from the Garden of Eden and all that stuff." And I said, "Well, if we evolved from apes, then why did apes stop having human kids?" And he said, "What?" And I said, well, if fish had gills and then they came out of the water and became animals that lived on the land and then they don't have gills anymore, then if we evolved from apes, how come we stopped evolving? And there was just dead airspace. I did not have an answer. And I thought it was really funny. I mean, it's, I read a book. I read a lot of books when I was going through treatment. I read joke books. I read books on philosophy, on religion. I read a book that was called Searching for God that was written by this rabbi, and I really liked it because the whole premise of it was that he says that when you're a little child, that God is an old man that lives up in the sky with a long beard, and he looks down on everybody, and he sees everyone, he hears everyone, he knows everything. And then when you get older and you're about the age that you realize there's no Easter Bunny or Santa Claus, that you know there's no old man that lives up in the sky with a long white beard. And for the problem for most children is most parents don't have a way to help their kid transition from the old man living up in the sky into the concept of what God or the Creator or whatever you believe it is. So he says when people say to him, I don't believe in God, he says, that's okay, because I don't believe in the same God you don't believe in.
I like that.
And you know what? I do. That's the way I was brought up. And I watch Carlin talk completely in the opposite direction, and it floors me. He makes me laugh so much. And, other people, I know him, and he's, when he came out with the book, Waiting for Jesus to Bring the Pork Chops or whatever it was, I bought it. I was laughing out loud reading it on an airplane. And the next radio show I did, I talked about how funny his book was. And I get home, and he calls me up, and he goes, are you plugging my book on the radio? And I said, yeah. He said, why? And I said, it's fucking hysterical. And he said, Schimmel, why would you buy my book? He said, all you have to do is ask me, and I would give it to you. And I said, I'm not going to ask you to give me your book. I said, I was on the road, and I wanted to get it then. Like 2 hours later, a messenger knocked on my door and handed me this package. I opened it up, and it was the same book from Carlin. He sent it over, and inside it says, hey, Schimmel, go fuck yourself, George Carlin.
That's great. That was worth having him send the book over.
Oh yeah. Well, I've had some amazing experiences. I was friends with Rodney Dangerfield, and people asked me what he was like, and I said, well, just imagine the movie Back to School or Easy Money and think that Rodney's not acting. They built the movie around his behavior because that's the way he really was. There was no get into the character. That was him. And he used to walk around in a jogging suit and a bottle of Evian water, but there was really Absolute vodka in there and not water. And the first time I went to go see him in Vegas, and my mom and dad were there. And I wanted my parents to meet Rodney because I thought, you know what? They're going to meet Rodney, and they think he's really funny. They've seen him on Ed Sullivan and on The Tonight Show and on the Mike Douglas Show, and they're going to, they're going to really believe that I'm in show business for real. So we go see his show, and my dad's a real early bird, and he goes to bed like 9 o'clock at night. So I go up to the dressing room with my mom, and I knock on the door, and Rodney, I swear I am not making this up, Rodney opens the door. He's wearing a silk robe that has like playing cards on it, with his balls hanging out, no underwear. I mean, literally out of the crack of the robe. He had a joint in one hand and a Miller Lite in the other. And he said, hey, you must be Bob's mom. And I'm like, oh, you've got to be shitting me. This is not what I wanted my mom to see. And he started hitting on my mom.
Oh, funny.
He said, where's your husband? She said, oh, he went to bed. And he goes, so what are you doing later, baby? He was really something.
It's so nice to hear that, too, because I've watched Caddyshack about 200 times, and I wanted him to actually be the guy in Caddyshack, because it just, I didn't want him to be acting.
The first time I met Rodney it was perfect. I mean, it really was. Talking about things happening at a moment. I had just come off stage at the Comedy Store, and Gallagher came over to me, and, comics all hang out back there in the parking lot and talk and everything. And he was talking to me, and he said, where do you think you're going, talking about jerking off and going to the bathroom? That leads nowhere, and this whole thing, in front of other comedians. And right then, Rodney came over to me, and he said, hey, kid, I just saw you on stage, and, I have a new HBO special I'm shooting next week, and you're the first person I'm picking to be on it, and it couldn't have happened at a better moment. So then Rodney goes, hey, you want to have dinner with me? And I said, yeah. So I go with him to have dinner at the Beverly Hilton Hotel on Wilshire and Santa Monica. We have dinner in there. When we come out, Merv Griffin's standing out front because Merv owned the hotel.
Right.
And Merv said, hey, Rodney, how you doing? And Rodney said, hey, Merv, everything's okay, all right? And as soon as Merv turned around, Rodney went, big fag. And I'm like, oh, my God. There's no way that Merv didn't hear that.
Oh, my God.
After I finished chemotherapy, Conan O'Brien was really great to me. And, he told me, when you're done with treatment, whenever you think you're ready to come on, you let me know and you're on. So I flew to New York. I'm going to go on Conan. I wanted to, even though I didn't look my best, because I had to know for myself that I still had it. I performed in Las Vegas in the middle of chemotherapy because I had to know for myself that even though cancer was ravaging my body the way it was, that it could not touch who I was or my sense of humor or my spirit, and I just refused to give in that way. So I'm walking down Broadway, and Jackie Mason comes out of the stage deli, and he's like with two friends, and they're walking up Broadway, and the two friends stop, and they're talking to someone else, and Jackie sees me. I'm completely bald. I have a little bit of hair under my lip, no eyebrows, no eyelashes. I'm wearing a baseball hat, and he comes over, and he goes, oh, my God, what happened to you? I said, I just finished chemotherapy. He said, chemotherapy? He said, you had cancer? What kind did you have? I said, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He said, oh, my God. He goes, how you doing now? I said, I'm doing okay. And he goes, how's your brother? I said, my brother's great. And his two friends walk over, and Jackie goes, I want you to meet a real funny guy, Howie Mandel. And he thought I was Howie.
Because you were bald. And
his friend goes, he doesn't look like Howie Mandel. And he goes, of course he doesn't look like Howie Mandel. He just finished chemotherapy. He lost a lot of weight. This. And so he says, what are you doing in town? And I said, I'm doing Conan O'Brien tomorrow night. He goes, are you busy tonight? And I said, no. He goes, how'd you like to have dinner? You and me, two intelligent comics, have a nice dinner and a conversation together. And I said, okay. So he said, where are you staying? I said, at the Parker Meridian. He said, under what name? I said, Robert Schimmel. He said, Robert Schimmel? He said, how did you come up with that name? I said, that's my real name. And he said, and Howie Mandel is your stage name? And he felt so bad for Howie, I didn't have the balls to tell him I wasn't him.
And did you go through with dinner?
Yeah. And then he winds up telling people that Howie, went through chemotherapy. And like a month later, I'm up in Montreal for the comedy festival, and I'm checking into the Delta Hotel, and that's where everybody stays. And the first person I run into in the lobby is Howie, and he comes over to me and he goes, "So how am I doing?"
That's great. Oh God.
Yeah.
Of course, everybody talks, so everybody knows.
Yeah. I got to work with a lot of, that's why I can't believe the life that I've had. When I was a kid, I always loved comedians, and I watched everybody. I'm 58 years old. I remember Sid Caesar and Your Show of Shows and Ernie Kovacs and Jackie Gleason and all that stuff. And one of the comics, Jerry Lewis, I idolized, and one of the comics that I really loved that made me laugh so much was Jackie Vernon. And I got to work with him a couple of times. And it was once they called and said, hey, this guy's opening act got sick. You think you want to go work at this place? They don't tell me who it is. I get there, and it says, tonight only, Jackie Vernon. And I'm like, holy shit. And, I'm hanging out with him. And then he goes, I'm going to the he goes, you're pretty funny. He goes, I'm doing this gig at the Hoosier Dome. You want to do that with me? It pays like $1,000 for the opening act for one night in the first class air. You sign for meals. I said, okay. Well, we get there, and it's a religious convention. And Jackie was like completely clean. I mean, there was nothing you could find offensive in anything he said, no matter who you were. I mean, he could literally do a show in front of the Pope. I mean, there was nothing. And these guys were like the Odd Fellows or whatever they're called. They look like Amish people, but they're not Amish, but it's almost something like that. So we get there, and he goes, oh, boy. He said, this isn't going to be good. He goes, let me tell you how we're going to do this. He said, I'm going to go on first because they know me, and I'm going to go do the show. Then I'm going to bring you on and introduce you as my protege. And as soon as I get the check, I'm going to give you the signal and you say goodnight. So I said, okay. He goes on, does 45 minutes. They love him. And he goes, and now I'd like to bring up this young up-and-coming comic. He's a really funny guy. He travels with me on the road, Robert Schimmel. And I walk out there. He hands me the mic, and I said, so I'm taking his shit. And he grabbed the mic out of my hand, and he said, how about another hand for Robert Schimmel, ladies and gentlemen? And I turned to him, and I said, what about the signal? And he said, we're way past the signal.
Now, I want to ask you, I mean, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was who makes you laugh now? But you mentioned Jackie Vernon, and I'm thinking, I mean, great comic, but, I mean, Jackie Vernon makes Robert Schimmel laugh. Who would have guessed?
A lot of people make me laugh. There's a lot of guys on the road that I work with that people never hear about. Chappelle makes me laugh.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis Miller makes me laugh.
I guess
Sarah Silverman makes. There's a lot of people that make. You know what? I love to laugh. I just really do. And one of the biggest things for me, as far as in my comedy career, is my manager called me about a year and a half ago, and he goes, "Did you read the New Yorker magazine this week?" And I said, "No." He goes, "There's an interview with Jerry Lewis in there, and they asked him who his favorite comics were, and he said you and Richard Lewis."
Wow.
I'm like, what? So he said, you should call him up and thank him. And I said, I'm not going to call Jerry Lewis. I mean, I was in love with this guy. You can't tell by my act, but I used to emulate him as a kid. I would knock stuff over intentionally, and I mean, I wanted to be him so badly. I even wore white socks with a suit. And I said, I can't call Jerry Lewis up. I can't. I mean, you know, Rodney you can call, but Jerry Lewis, that's another level completely. And he said, well, at least call his office and just leave a message for him. So I called up, I leave a message for him, and I said, I just want, please tell Mr. Lewis that, you know, I read the thing in the New Yorker and that I really appreciate it. I go to lunch with my wife, and my cell phone rings. It's like a half an hour later, and I go, hello, and it's like, Jerry Lewis. And I'm like, what? He goes, what can I do for you, kid? And I couldn't talk. I really couldn't talk. And he said, you know, he goes, I don't like the phone. He goes, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, nothing. He goes, why don't you fly up, he lives in Vegas. He goes, why don't you fly up to Vegas, we'll have someone pick you up at the airport, and we'll hang out tomorrow. Well, I almost started crying. I mean, I couldn't, you have no idea. This is why I can't not be positive about life, okay? Because I'll tell you how wild it is. This world and this business, I would have never, ever dreamt in my wildest imagination that Jerry Lewis would ever know who I was, ever, before I was in comedy and even when I was in comedy. And I know for a fact that he does not go for profanity at all, that it's something that he detests. He doesn't like it. And I go up there. He said, I saw your HBO special. I was in the hospital, and he said, I got to tell you, kid. He said, I almost started crying. He said, you made me laugh so hard. And I sat there, and I couldn't talk. And he said, you don't want to talk to me? I said, I can't. I said, I can't believe I'm with you. He said, you'll get over it. And I was there like all day. The night before I didn't go to sleep, I literally was like a girl asking my wife, should I wear these pants and this shirt? I mean, I was getting to meet my idol.
Right.
I mean, And then he was so nice to me. I spent the whole afternoon, and I got to tell you, you hear these stories about people, Streisand and Jerry Lewis and other people that are supposed to be real assholes and everything. Well, I don't think they're assholes. I think that they're maybe perfectionists, and that, it's their career, it's their name, people are coming to see them, and they just want the shit to be right. Mm-hmm. And it's not being an asshole if you want it to be right. And he told me that, he goes, I would love to tell you that Dean and I were geniuses and that we had the whole thing planned out. And he said, but it wasn't. He said, we were really lucky. We were two guys at a time. The timing was perfect. It was right after the war, and people really, really dug the camaraderie between Dean and I. And he said, and honestly, we were getting $50,000 a week in the 50s. Mm. In the 50s, they were getting $50,000 a week, and he said our best jokes would be throwaway lines for real comedians who were getting $50 a week. And he told me that he missed Dean every day, and that he talked to him every day from when the day Dean's son died in the plane crash. Mm-hmm. And he said, it's not true that we never talked to each other. He said, it's just that, I couldn't go anywhere without them asking where Dean was, and Dean couldn't go to a party without them saying, where's Jerry? And that they had to know who their own identity was for themselves, and that he wanted to be a director, and he liked staying on the set and doing all that stuff, and Dean would want to do his thing and go play golf. Mm-hmm. He said, but it wasn't that they hated each other and it was a big blowout thing, that they decided to end while they were on top, because he said they knew it could only last so long, and then they didn't want to split up on the way down.
Robert, you mentioned Jerry Lewis, which is interesting to me, because as I was reading the book, I was actually thinking a little about him, because one of the things that happens in the book is that you, and just by virtue of publishing the book, I'm sure this is the case, sharing your story and talking about it, in some ways you are kind of helping people. And I was actually thinking about Jerry Lewis, and I can't really make a neat, clean parallel here, but here's a guy who was affected by something at some point, and just it really changed the tenor of his career.
I know, but you know what? He won't talk about it. That's
right.
When I was with him that day, he said, you can ask me anything you want except why I do the muscular dystrophy telethon. He said, that's a personal thing, and he said, and that is going to go to the grave with me. But you can ask me anything else. And, people can make fun of him and say, that it's a real hacky thing, and that it's all a put on at the way he acts. Well, I spent a day with him, and I don't know what it is. Something definitely happened that he's that passionate about it. But, you can say whatever you want about him, but there isn't anybody else raising that kind of money for muscular dystrophy. I mean, how can you knock him for doing that? I mean, talk to parents that have kids that have it, and they're not going to say he's a hack. I mean, it's, where would they be without him? God knows how much money he's raised since he started. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a lot. So, it's... I don't think it's selling out, doing stuff like that. That selling out thing with comedians is a really bizarre deal. You do network television and then people go, he sold out. Well, that's just like saying that people say you're a comedian's comedian. Well, that's great, but, being a comedian's comedian doesn't pay a lot. Right. Comics don't pay to see other comics. You get in for free. Well, and for you to not do the Tonight Show or Letterman because you want to show people that, you're not going to do that kind of thing, well, not only is shorting yourself, but don't you think even if you were me or Sam Kinison or Bill Hicks or Pryor or whatever, that if you did Letterman or the Tonight Show or Conan, that all your fans would say, wow, he's on the Tonight Show? I knew this guy was funny 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to say we don't like you anymore because you did network television.
You were on Howard Stern last week, and so he teased you by saying that you were finally going on the Today Show, but only because you got cancer.
Yeah.
Lots of people knew you were funny, but it took that to get you on there. How did that go? And what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, that was the wildest radio show I was ever on last week. My wife has absolutely no desire to be in show business. She did not go there to be on Howard. She's never been on Howard. My daughter's been on with me a few times, but and that only because once, the first time I went and my daughter went with me, she was in the green room and Gary went and got her and brought her in. And that was the first time I ever saw Howard back down, was with my daughter. Because
Really?
He said, wow, you're a really cute girl. And she said, oh, thank you. And he said, how'd you like to model a couple of bikinis for me? And she said, sure. Bring your daughter in and we can do it together. And he changed the subject immediately. And the first time I did Howard, I had no idea what to expect. And my CD had just come out on Warner Brothers. And the president of Warner Brothers was friends with Howard, and Howard's soundtrack for his movie was on Warner Brothers. So he sent Howard the CD. He thought it was funny. I go there. They bring me in. I sit on the couch. He goes, here's a real funny guy, Bob Schimmel. He is a new comedian. He's the only one that calls me Bob. I have to call Bob Schimmel, and he's got a really funny CD out. And I sit on the couch, and he goes, so you had a kid that died, huh? That was the first thing he said. And I said, yeah. And he said, wow, that must have been really something, huh? And I'm like, geez, where is he going with this? So I said, Howard, I said, yeah, I did have a son. His name was Derek, and he passed away in 1992. And I said, I got to tell you that when Children's Hospital sent him home and said they couldn't do anything anymore, the Make-A-Wish Foundation came to our house, and they said, and this is a true story, and they said, we'd like to make a wish come true for your son. And I said, well, his wish is to watch Dolly Parton blow me. And Howard screamed. I mean, they cut to a commercial, and Gary Delabate came over to me and said, you can be on for the rest of your life. And I said, why? And he goes, because that was unreal. He said, there is no way that Howard expected that kind of comeback.
Yeah.
And he said, and you could have made him look like a real creep at that moment, and instead you came up with a line that got him, and that's what he originally got famous for, was getting the best out of people where they wouldn't do it on any other show. And he was really great. He used to call me when I was in the hospital. He actually called me once, and I was live on the air, and I didn't know, and I felt really shitty. I mean, I was like after my sixth chemotherapy, and I'm just really just beat up badly, and I'm laying in bed, and the phone rings, and he goes, hey, Bob, it's Howard. And I said, hey, Howard, how are you doing? He goes, can I ask you a question? He said, do you think you're going to make it to New Year's Eve?
Oh, I remember.
Like, what? And he said, because Robin's got Anthony Quinn in the death pool, and I don't know whether to pick him or you. And I said, are you shitting me? And he said, hey, watch your mouth. We're on the radio. And I'm like, we're on the radio? You're calling me if you don't tell me? So I said, you know what? Go with Anthony Quinn, because I'm not dying. Anthony Quinn fucking dies. I can't believe it. I don't know. This guy wasn't even sick. He had a kid when he was 75 years old or something. He died. And Howard said, wow, I picked the right person. I'm like, no, man, I feel really shitty that happened. I just really did. It's amazing to be in this. I love making people laugh ever since I was a kid. I didn't know I was going to be a comic. I don't know if you know, but I got into this business totally tricked into it, basically.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, I was married already to my first wife, living in Scottsdale, Arizona. I grew up in New York. I had Jessica, my daughter, who was on Stern last week. And I was managing a high-end stereo video store in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's called Jerry's Audio, and it was great. I was having a great life. We had a brand new house we lived in, and I came to visit my sister in L.A., and on Saturday night, she said, and it was just me. My wife and daughter didn't come. I just came to see my sister, and Saturday night, she took me to the Improv on Melrose. And I'd never been to, even though I watch comics all the time on TV, I've never been to a comedy club. I mean, this is 1980, before the boom, and there wasn't clubs everywhere. And she signs me up on this amateur thing. And the way it works is you put someone's name, you put your name on a piece of paper, you fold it up, you put it in the waste paper basket, and Bud Friedman, the owner of the Improv, actually was the MC of the show. He would stick his hand in the bucket, pull out a piece of paper, read the name, and you got 2 minutes on stage. And he had an egg timer on the bar stool on stage, and they would set it for 2 minutes, and when the timer went ding, you had to say goodnight. Even if you were in the middle of a joke and you couldn't get to the punchline, goodnight, and that's it. Well, my sister signs me up without telling me. And I'm sitting in the audience, and I'm having a beer with her, and all of a sudden he goes, Robert Schimmel? And I'm like, what? She goes, come on, you're funny, get up there. And I said, I can't get up there. And Bud's like, come on, don't chicken out, where are you? And he goes, don't we want him to get up here? And the crowd's like clapping. So I go up, and I said, I'm not really a comedian, and I'm a stereo salesman, and my sister signed me up because she thinks I'm funny, and, I don't know anything about show business. I could sell you, speakers and this. And they started laughing, and I said, please don't laugh. And because I remember my first thing, I said, everybody has a sexual fetish or a fantasy, and mine is to be humiliated in public, in front of a lot of people. And somebody yelled out, go fuck yourself. And I said, thank you very much. They started laughing. I got off. Bud came over to me and he said, sign up for spots. You can work here whenever you want.
Wow.
And that's all I needed to hear. That 2 minutes on stage hooked me right away. And I go back home, tell my wife I want to be a comedian, put the house up for sale, quit my job, pack everything up in a U-Haul. We're going to drive to L.A. We're going to crash at my sister's until we find an apartment, and I'm going to be a comedian. Well, we drive to L.A. I get off the Hollywood freeway on the Melrose exit because I want to show my wife the club that I'm going to be performing at, and it burnt down the night before we got there.
And was this the first divorce or the second divorce?
No, this is the first.
Okay. And
it was still smoldering.
Wow.
The sidewalk within the street was still wet. The windows are boarded up. There was like this smoky steam coming out of there. And Bud was out in the street talking to like insurance guys and whatever. And my wife said, oh, my God. And I said, don't worry, I'm sure they have insurance. And she said, who gives a shit about them? She said, you sold the house and you quit your job, and now the place doesn't even exist. And then I walked over to Bud, and I said, wow, what happened? And he said, do I know you? And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. He didn't even remember who I was anymore.
Wow.
And that was it. So I got a day job selling stereo equipment in Beverly Hills. And I wound up, this is such a crazy life, I wound up selling a stereo to Steve Martin. And I go to his house to install it. And I'm in Steve Martin's house, and I'm on my hands and knees. I'm laying speaker wire, running it under the rug from the living room into the den and this other room. And he's there. He's home while I'm doing it. And he comes into the room, because I was working at the stereo store in the daytime and then getting on stage on amateur nights at the Comedy Store and the Laugh Factory and Osco's Disco and any place where they had a comedy night. And I said, I'm a comedian too. And Steve said, yeah, that's why you're installing my stereo system. And then I'm like, oh, God, I sound like Rupert Pupkin. So I wind up getting discovered by William McCune, and he's the guy that discovers Steve Martin.
Right.
So if you look at all Steve Martin's albums, they say William E. McCune presents Steve Martin. That's what it says on mine. William E. McCune presents Robert Schimmel.
Well, Robert,
on my second CD, Steve Martin wrote the liner notes.
Oh. It's funny because I just finished his book about a week ago.
Great
Robert,
book.
I desperately hate to interrupt you, but we're going to run out of time, and I want to make sure to tell everybody the name of your book again and that you're out on tour. So I really want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. And
it's my pleasure.
Welcome.
You know what? It's obviously comedy, because very few people you can say Jackie Vernon to and they know who you're talking about right away.
I try. I certainly try, and I
know
really,
it's great.
I really appreciate your time. I want to tell everybody that they can order Robert Schimmel's book, Cancer on $5 a Day, at, of course, fine booksellers everywhere, including the Internet. You can also order Robert's CDs, which I really recommend. They're on his site, if nowhere else, at www.robertschimmel, that's SCHIMMEL.com. And quickly, I'll tell you that he is appearing in the coming weeks, and you'll just have to check locally. He's in Dayton, Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, Pleasanton, California, Tempe, Arizona, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Omaha, Washington, Richmond. He's coming. Look for him. And Robert, thank you again so much for your time. It was
thank you for yours. Are you kidding? Time is the greatest gift anyone can give you, because once you give it, you can't take it back. So the time you gave me today, that's mine now.
Appreciate that very much. It was a pleasure to have you. And
I'll have to do it again sometime. I hope I don't have to get another disease and write another book to get on your show.
You can come back any time.
Okay, I'll take you up on it.
All right, Robert. Thank you so much, and stay well.
Okay, you too. Thank you very much.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.